you for having me. My name is Minenhle, and I am the Psychosocial Wellbeing Lead at WPDI South Africa. I have a bit of a background that I'd like to share with you. So I did my undergraduate studies at the University of Johannesburg. I have a bachelor in social work, so I'm also a social worker by profession. I then did my master's at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I'm currently a PhD candidate at the School of Public Leadership at Stellenbosch University.
Wow, thank you so much. And could you share a bit about your experience with WPDI? What programs have you facilitated, and how have leading these sessions impacted your perspective on your profession?
Thank you so much. That is a really good question. I think maybe as a start, let me just share that it's been a really eye-opening experience for me working at WPDI. I mean, I've been practicing as a social worker, but there's different types of communities that you come across. So maybe let me just share a little bit about my responsibilities at WPDI, right? So at this point, as a psychosocial well-being officer, taking a lead in the social work program in the organization, I run a number of responsibilities, right? And that includes things like actually conducting individual counseling sessions with communities and different members within communities at large. I also run, a lot of group work initiatives. There's also a community development or community initiative aspect that I also partake in. But over and above that, I'm also supervising social work interns from both local and international universities, right, who are studying towards their social work degrees. And we've intentionally targeted individuals who are senior in their academics. So we're looking at honors students, master's students, and they work really closely with us, and I lead that particular program along with the different types of therapeutic interventions that we provide to the different communities. And so under this program, we've had a number of trainings that are related to things like the tenets of trauma, what is trauma, helping communities understand the different aspects of trauma, the different types of traumas, the signs and symptoms of traumas as well, and overall aspects of mental health and mental well-being, right? So there's been quite a number of activities that we do in these trainings as well. And what we've come to find, just going back to your question as well, is that there's a lot of, it invokes a lot of emotional turmoil every time we do these trainings. We find that community members most times have not even touched on these topics. They've not even told anyone about the traumas that they've experienced. And so when we get there, it's sort of like a moment for them to share. It's like an outlet. So there's quite a lot of emotion that takes place. There's quite a lot of things that get reawakened that people had buried somewhere in a deep, dark corner, and what we also find is that, there's, along with these traumas and challenges, we also tend to find our clientele from those spaces. So a lot of our individual clients, our group interventions, and a whole lot of community dialogues and so on come from these kinds of initial interactions. I know I'm going on a tangent, but I hope this helps in understanding just some of the work that we do under the program and what it is that we cover. So there's been a lot of learning. There's been a lot of learning in terms of, yes, we are professionals, but there are different stories that you get from different environments, and the communities that we serve are quite trauma-stricken. They're really affected by different types of traumas, different types of conflicts and violence. And so that is why then the work that we do is so important, in the sense that it helps people open up. It creates a safe space for community members to share their challenges, their experiences. And it's also just, it's sustainable in the sense that the more we engage with them, the more we go to the communities, the more we have different types of sessions, whether group or individual, we see that there's a difference that is actually coming out from these communities.
Thank you so much. And that literally leads into my next question of how do you believe that addressing trauma and understanding mental health challenges can
Mm.
impact women in particular and help them feel stronger and more empowered in communities affected by violence?
Thank you for that question as well. For that, I want to start off by just sharing that there's this old age saying that basically talks about abafazi, what's in abafazi, what's in imbokodo. And what that means is that you strike a woman, you strike a rock. And you know, as part of your question, you asked about how it makes women strong and empowered. And there's always been this perception that women have to be strong, and women are as much as, yes, we are strong, we are a force to be reckoned with, we are phenomenal, but there's always just this expectation that we always have to be strong, we always have to be you know coming from a place of strength and resilience. And sometimes that can be taken advantage of, in the sense that when people say women are strong, that means they can handle all kinds of, atrocities and all kinds of negativity, and, anything that we do to women, they'll bounce back because they're strong. And that's one part of it. And I feel as though women need to be taken care of as well, in as much as we are strong, yes, but we also need to be taken care of. We need to be treated like, the queens that we are ultimately. But back to your question, in relation to women facing violence and poverty, it is important for women to be empowered, particularly in the ways that we go out to communities and train them on different aspects of trauma, how to cope with trauma, identify trauma, and so on. And it's important mainly because what we find is that when we empower women, we're not just empowering them, but that permeates into the family structure. The family then gets empowered when the woman feels as though she, not appears, but sort of steps in as an empowered individual. When a woman is empowered, she can empower her family, she can empower her community at large, right? What we have found in our trainings, I'll just give some examples of what I mean when I say this. We find that sometimes in our trainings, because we'll start off with the trauma aspect, the mental health, all the tenets of trauma and so on. And then usually on the last day, which is usually day 3 or 4, we would look at issues of self-esteem and female empowerment and, assertiveness for women and things like that. And what that does is that at the end of the training, they've been empowered with all the information they needed in relation to trauma, well-being, mental health, sexual and reproductive health rights. And then in the end, they are now brought back into themselves. And what then happens is that in those sessions, they would come up with different solutions to societal problems. In their communities, they'll then say, we have an issue of, let's say, neglected children, for instance. We have an issue of neglected children in our communities and nobody's doing anything about it. So I'm going to raise my hand and actually step in and, run an after school program type thing, right? And what that does, it shows us that then our training did not only empower this individual woman, but now she's going to go out and she's going to do something to change her community, right? So when we do our trainings, we use a lot of strength-based techniques. We use a lot of cognitive behavioral techniques. And what happens then is that people find solutions to their societal problems. And so I think ultimately, in summary, when women are empowered, they do not keep that empowerment to themselves, but they take the initiative to do something for their communities. They think of how they can improve their family relationships. How can they improve the lives of their children by them showing up better, And I think ultimately when you empower a woman, you empower communities. That is why woman empowerment is so important.
Wow, thank you so much. And can I ask what barriers do women face when trying to gain access to mental health care, to trainings? What have you seen play the largest role in preventing women from accessing these necessary tools and then just accessing like help in general?
So sure, there's a number of challenges, but let me start off with the one that it's sort of like a common denominator amongst all these other challenges. It speaks to issues of stigmatization, right? When we talk about, let's start off with healthcare, and then sexual and reproductive healthcare, and then mental health care, right? When we look at the healthcare and sexual and reproductive healthcare arena, we have policies in South Africa that speak to sexual and reproductive health rights. We have facilities that have been designated to provide healthcare and sexual and reproductive health care. However, it's one thing to have a facility, and then it's another thing to actually have access to the services that they are providing, right? So what happens in our societies is that, especially for young women, I'll speak for young women in particular because they experience this quite a lot. There's a number of issues with stigmatization. So, for instance, as a young woman, I go to a healthcare facility and I am looking for family planning mechanisms, right? I'm looking for contraceptive methods. Maybe I want barrier methods. Perhaps I want to get access to HIV testing, right? When I step in as a young woman, say, for instance, maybe 17, 18, 16, 17, 18, or younger, let's maybe 15, 16, 17, 18 or so. I step into this healthcare facility, and the first thing that happens is that I get side eyes. What are you doing here? Why are you asking for these things? There's judgment already imposed on you, but you're so young, you're a child, you shouldn't be doing these things. You shouldn't be here asking for these things. So you can imagine what that does to this young woman who came in here innocently looking for sexual and reproductive health care, and what I get is judgment and stigma. So firstly, that is the first barrier to entry when it comes to accessibility for sexual and reproductive health rights. That also speaks to healthcare, depending on what kind of healthcare you need. If you're a young woman or you are a woman in general and you have a sexually transmitted infection, you go to a healthcare facility, you're already getting judged because that means you're careless, you're promiscuous, you get what I'm saying. So we have a lot of cultural stereotypes that lead to barriers to access. Even though the facility is there, it is available, it is resourced, there are people who are supposed to be providing the service. But what tends to happen is that then there's barriers due to stigmatization, judgment. And what then happens is that as a young woman who has experienced this, I'm not going back there again. So then I continue living my life in isolation to healthcare facilities, because when I go there, this is what happens. And then that leads to a number of challenges societally already, right? Because we need more of sort of an awareness, and we need more knowledge to be shared in these spaces. And now this is in an urban area. So can you imagine in rural areas? It's worse, right? Then when we talk about mental health care, then once again, stigmatization. We have a number of cultural barriers, once again, that make us believe that, we should not be firstly telling people, strangers, our stories, right? There's also this barrier that we don't need mental health care, that's it's not our thing, so there's those types of barriers and challenges. And then when we start speaking about this in communities, then you realize people are like, hey, hold on, actually, I have some problems I want to talk about, whereas before they felt as though, no, there was no need. I don't need to tell strangers my problems. But once we destigmatize these healthcare, mental health care um, challenges, then we can work towards stopping or eliminating these barriers. But essentially, those are some of the barriers that we face. It's stigmatization, it is judgment, it is victimization as well, yeah, amongst others. But like I said, there's a common denominator which speaks to discrimination, stigmatization, um, yeah, and judgment.
Thank you. I thank you so much for that answer. I feel like it does transcend different communities across the world too. We see these repeated patterns, and
Mhm.
I think to conclude today, if you could give one piece of advice to young women across the world, what would it be and why?
Ooh, one piece of advice. Okay. I need to think about this because, as a young woman, I wouldn't want to get any bad advice or give off bad advice. But I think more than anything, it's for us to have our voice and use that voice. For instance, as a woman sitting here with you, you as a woman sitting there, we need to step into these communities and spread the message. We need to go out there and actually talk about the challenges. And I help them speak about their challenges so that we can come in and, bring some sort of a societal change. I think more than anything, as women, we need not be victims anymore, in as much as society forces us and victimizes us and discriminates against us. We need to use our voices for good. And when we use our voices for good, then we can begin to empower other women, bring other women into these spaces. And another important thing is that as women, we really need to change the trajectory of our relationships with each other, right? So my advice to young women is that honestly, we need to love each other a lot more as women. And also we need to support one another. We need to step into rooms and take up spaces for ourselves and for the next generation that comes after us. I can't sit in certain spaces on my own and then forget about the next woman who's also trying to come up and then marginalize that person so that they don't step into such spaces. If that makes any sense. But essentially, we need to continue to actually use our voices for good, but also use our voices to support and help other women come up. And that's what I aim to do. So I hope someone else aims to do the same thing. And the more we do that, the more women step into spaces and we take up these spaces. Yeah.